Special thanks to Affordable Prestige Cars for providing the Jag in this review, and for any of you who have watched my numerous other Jaguar reviews and content, you'll notice that they pop up quite a lot, and they do offer a lot of different Jaguar models, from XJs to XKs, XF, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're in the market for one, then of course click over to their website via the link in the video description and check out their current stock. This review has been coming for quite some time, because ages ago on the channel I reviewed a lower version of this same generation of XJ, along with of course the newer one as well, but in particular I reviewed an XJ8 Sport, which also has the V8 engine but only 250 horsepower, and I said many things in that video about how much I love the car, which I still do. It's a fantastic car. Feels way quicker than a 250 horsepower car usually would, great handling, pleasure to work with, and a great deal as well. But I also mentioned that I wanted to get my hands on an XJR for obvious reasons, and now I finally have. So the question is simple. Does this car build on all of those things which I already loved about the XJ8, and does this one rank up there among my favourite Jags? Because for those who are new to the channel, I have a lot of time for Jaguar. I really love a lot of their models. I've even owned one myself, the XKR. The XFR got my Car of the Year award last year, so I really do have a lot of time for Jags, because they are fantastic used deals and offer so much for the money. So does this one join that club? Well, spoiler alert, yes, it absolutely does. In fact, I would rank this as my third favourite Jaguar overall that I've driven so far, just above the I-Pace, which is a little bit of a weird comparison, but I love that car. It's expensive though, which holds it back for me. My second favourite would be probably the XFR, and of course the number one being the car that I actually bought, the XKR. This one though offered basically exactly what I wanted it to. It built on everything that was already good about that XJ8, and of course I would recommend checking that review out as well, because I'll touch on many similar points to this car, but this one adds on to what was already great and makes it even better. If I recall correctly, that car I think did 0 to 60 in something like 7.5 seconds, maybe 7.3 if memory serves. This one drops it quite a lot, of course, with that supercharged 400 horsepower engine, a 4.2 V8 incidentally, to about 5 seconds, 0 to 60. Now some will probably say you can get it even lower. Wouldn't surprise me, to be honest. A lot of manufacturers do undersell what their cars can do. The top speed is limited to 155. In the UK that doesn't really matter too much anyway, and of course it will do a lot more without the limiter. I suspect it would probably overrun the limiter anyway, as a lot of Jags will. In terms of what this offers for the money though, that's where things get really juicy. Because even though I wouldn't rank it as being one of my absolute favourite Jags, a very respectable used Jag is the S-Type R. Now I've never really liked the look of that car, which I know will be controversial for some people, but in terms of what it offers for the money, it is a sleeper bargain, at least in the UK. Dirt cheap, nobody values them these days, and they will go up over time as people realise how good they are, as I said in my review for that car, but it's just one of those cars that's so much better than you'd really think it could be. Now the XJ already has more of an existing fan base. In many ways the S-Type kind of was the precursor for the XF. It was a Jag that was different, what I would call new age Jaguar. The XJ is as old school as it gets, and that's why many owners don't like the latest one, because it's a radical departure from this. Now this car was a departure from its predecessors in the 90s, and even a fraction of the earlier 2000s with the X300 and the X308. Now I have driven one of those. I didn't get the chance to review it, but I did drive an X308 XJR with a 370 horsepower engine that preceded this one. It was a very nice car, lovely interior, super low, really wide stance. It felt like a hot rod. It was very cool, had a great retro vibe, but the headroom wasn't that great, and in some ways it did feel its age. This one improves drastically, in my opinion, over that one in terms of, in particular, The attention to detail, the quality of the finish, and actually feeling like it's something that doesn't necessarily need to be like your pride and joy, like the older one kind of does to me. This one feels like you could just use it as a daily and a bit of a beater, but still have a ton of fun in it. And I will say, that appeals to me as a reviewer a lot more, because I'm not the kind of person who wants a second car for fun. I like a car that's fun that I can use all the time. This has that exact kind of vibe. Now, saying fun and XJ in the same sentence may seem a little bit odd, because traditionally speaking, all XJs are kind of old man's Jags. So it may seem strange that me, a 27-year-old guy, loves the XJ so much. And in fact, even before driving the R, this one already was, the XJ8 even, my favourite generation, the X350, for a number of reasons. To me, this one strikes a perfect balance between being new enough to benefit from better production, easier to find parts if things do go wrong, which on an older car would be more rare, not necessarily brand new or in great condition, maybe more expensive, more of a collector's item. This doesn't have any of those problems, because just like the S-Type R, it is a little bit undervalued. The used prices highlight that, and you get so much car for the money as a result. The prices range wildly in the UK, literally like 3 times what the base price can be. You can buy one for as little as about 5 grand for really high mileage. For that, you're looking at like 120, 130, even 150,000 miles. You might want to be careful with something like that. I would recommend probably driving your own car up to that kind of mileage, but not necessarily buying one that somebody else has done that mileage in, because you can't really be sure of what they have or haven't done. If you want to pay more and get super low miles, well, on Auto Trader at the moment, you can pay up to about 15, 16 grand for one that's done barely 50,000. Now, interestingly, this is one of the relatively few occasions where I would actually recommend not buying the lowest mileage you can afford. And the reason why is because in many ways, it actually doesn't matter when it comes to a car like this, because even a car that's done 90,000, even 110,000, you can still get the parts for these very easily. And just like my experience when I owned my XJR, which you would think would be a really expensive car to find parts for, well, yes, if you go for Jaguar originals, they can be expensive, but you can buy so many alternatives. Even back when I had my VW Touareg, there are many alternatives that you can buy which are nowhere near the cost of a main dealer, but still do just as good of a job, sometimes even better. A Jag, for example, an R model in particular, is way cheaper to retrofit, outfit, repair, etc. than its equivalent BMW M, Audi S, or Mercedes AMG. Especially something like a Mercedes. You're paying easily 3 times the price in some cases just on parts. And the great thing about a Jag as well, I'm sure this one carries it over as my XJR did, most of the things that go wrong aren't really that expensive anyway. It tends to be more of an annoyance. You know, you'll have the gremlin here, or the troublesome bit of electronic over there, maybe a bulb that keeps going. So it's not expensive stuff, and if you want to do it yourself, you can get a lot of it even cheaper. But even if you have to get a garage or a mechanic to do it, it's not crazy stuff, unless something like a transmission or an engine completely breaks. Most of the rest of the car isn't that bad. Now, for some things, of course, you can pay a lot, you know, parts on the interior, that kind of stuff, but you know what I'm talking about, generally speaking. In terms of stuff like comfort and space and practicality, well, of course, that's a huge trump card that this one has over something like an XK. The XK looks stunning, sounds great, has fantastic performance, and I loved mine. But the reason why I sold it is the exact thing that this one has: space. I got rid of my XJR because I found myself needing the space more than I thought I would. This car has so much space, and although you'd expect all XJs to have a lot of space, this one absolutely blows the other ones, newer and older, completely out of the water on headroom in particular. It's not even close, trust me. The newer one is much more cramped because of the sunroof, etc., and the sleeker shape. The older one, as I said, feels like much more of a squat down, wide little hot rod, and consequently the headroom suffers. Interestingly, that era of XK suffers in the same way as well, being so low and so sleek. This one is much bigger. This is wider, taller, and longer than the previous generation. Some people might find it a little bit too tall looking, but trust me, the amount of sheer space that you have is fantastic. Trunk space, as you'll see, is borderline endless. It's got a massive trunk, and even for those who maybe still think of XJs in the old man sense, even the fuel economy is not bad. It's similar to what I was getting in my XK, and one of the reasons why is because for this car they actually chose to update the body and chassis to aluminium. Once again, no surprise, compared to the XK they did the same thing, and that drops the weight drastically. Now depending on who you ask, you're looking at about 1700 to 1800 kilos, so again not that much more than the two-door XJR, which is saying a lot for a big air suspension, 5-seater, 4-door, great headroom limo, which at the end of the day is what this is. Now speaking to stuff like air suspension, what is the ride quality like? Well, that is one way that you can definitely feel a difference between this and some other performance Jag models. The S-Type felt really comfortable. Of course the XK in its own way does for a GT, and the XFR was super smooth and I really enjoyed driving it. I will say that this one takes the cake though. The air suspension is very, very nice to work with. You float over most of the bumps in the road. It kind of does feel like a much faster, much more affordable Bentley or a Rolls-Royce. It doesn't have the image of those cars, but that kind of means it's a bit of a sleeper. So if you're into that, it definitely offers it. But once again, to touch on the point of air suspension, what about issues? Because that tends to be, ironically, in a similar way to a lot of the cars that I've owned, Touareg V10, Jag XJR, and especially my other Maseratis, my current car, a Quattroporte, and the older Quattroporte that I had previously before the Jag, people are put off by the potential risks. Understandably. If something goes wrong, surely it's going to be a real pain in the backside and super expensive. Well, on an XJ, there are certain things that can go wrong. In particular, when I was looking through the forums and checking out stuff, and of course, if you are or were an owner of one of these, be sure to put your thoughts on these down below or maybe add to it. There are some common issues which can occur, which you should look out for. One of the most common one is air suspension. If it does go, it can be one of the slightly more expensive things. So look out for warning lights, check the ride quality in general. If it's working, it's working. If it's not, it's not. You know, there's not too much of a way of telling if something's going to break in the long term, but at least check that for the moment. The suspension bushes, and again, that's something with the XK that had that issue as well. Not particularly expensive though, at least on my XK. So on this one, the air suspension may complicate things a little bit, but based on my experience, it shouldn't be crazy money anyway. You can get some corrosion on the aluminium body, which may surprise you, but you can get some bubbling. My XJR actually had a little bit of bubbling on the passenger door, and one of the ones which I mentioned in my review of the XJ8 as well was that the discs on these can actually warp. Sometimes even every year they require new discs, perhaps on the front. Now the reason for that is because the Brembo discs, or the Brembo brakes overall, that were fitted from the factory apparently never actually fitted and worked as well with the Jaguar components as they were supposed to. So it's kind of just an innate fault that is going to keep causing that over time. Now some owners never report that. Other owners report it, as I said, every year. The way that you can tell if that is on the way is under braking, or even at certain speeds. Just check for that little bit of judder through the steering wheel. If you feel it juddering from side to side, that can be the issue, especially under braking though. Once again though, you don't necessarily have to buy Brembo parts. With my Touareg, one of the things that I did to it was change the discs and pads all round. Volkswagen wanted £1,500 to do so on a car that was from 2006. Of course I didn't pay that. So I bought aftermarket parts, which did a phenomenal job with massive discs and really hard wearing pads for about $350 total for all 4 discs and all of the pads. Once again, shop around. Jaguar will always charge more. Any manufacturer will always charge more because they add their markup and all of the other expenses that you're paying for. So don't be afraid to shop around. I would always recommend that with any performance car, unless of course money is no object to you, but chances are if you're looking for a performance bargain, then you probably do care about saving some money here and there. I would say overall that this car is a fantastic used bargain. It definitely takes everything that I loved about the XJ8 and does improve it even more. I will say that if performance isn't the most important thing to you, you might actually even be better off buying the XJ8 because it feels very quick in its own way. If you need that extra grunt, the extra show-off factor, and just knowing that you're sitting in the top of the range model, then by all means go for this one because it's not that expensive anyway. I would recommend looking probably in the 5 to 10 grand region. There's not really too much point in going up to 15, 16 in my opinion, because you can just get interesting other options for that price, even something like an XKR with lower miles, but of course that's your decision to make at the end of the day. In terms of fuel economy, I know again, one of the existing cliches of an XJ, if you will, is that they're very thirsty. Not really. This one is improved over the previous generation. The older cars, that is fairly true. This one can average 22, 26, according to, again, the owner's forums, get up about 35 on the highway, or the motorway here in the UK. That checks. That's very similar to what I used to get in my XKR even, and of course the XKR would have an advantage in aerodynamics. So across the board, it's a great engine, 400 horses, 408 pound-feet of torque, so it's a great motor to work with. The supercharger is much more pronounced on this car than in the later XKR, where they kind of got rid of that whine a little bit. So if you do like your superchargers to whine, then it definitely does that. Overall, fantastic car, tons of space, super comfortable, really good handling. The brakes do an excellent job as well. Just watch for those discs warping and a little bit of judder through the wheel. And overall, if you want a luxury car for a dirt cheap price with really good performance, well, there aren't really that many that can match this one. But overall, that's it for my thoughts. As I said, if you are or were an owner, drop your thoughts down below, and if you are in the market, of course, check out the comments, read other people's experiences, and be sure to check out my other Jag content as well, perhaps even for the XFR, the S-Type R, or even that XJ8 Sport. But stick around on the channel for more reviews in future, and until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.